All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. It's kind of surreal being here, actually. It's been it'll be close to 6 months since I preached here last, and so lots happened in that time. But it still feels like home. Like, not much has changed. This still feels like home. It feels good being here. And I've had a few opportunities to speak at other churches, a few invitations to speak at other churches in the last 5 or 6 months, and just because of the way things have worked out, I've had to say no, just because we are so busy with the ministry that we have going with the youth right now. But when Dave asked if I could preach, I was like, I don't care what I'm doing that day, I'll go. And so, and it worked out really well being here, because right now I'm in between series with our youth, and so this is like kind of my random in-between week, and so it worked out well that I could be here. We did have a youth event Friday night at the church building where we were up all night. And so I won't fall asleep during my sermon, and I just ask that you do the same. All right? So let's stick through this together. So we had a youth event Friday night, and then I leave Tuesday for Kananaskis. And so it's kind of a busy time, but I wanted to make sure I could be here today to be with you. And so thank you for inviting me back. Thank you for having me here today. And thumbs up, Martin. I'm just so thankful to be here. Now, does anyone recognize these people? VeggieTales. Nathaniel's like, I know who that is. All right, I used to watch these growing up. If you don't know what VeggieTales are, they're talking vegetables. And before you start judging and going, talking vegetables, what do you want? They talk about God, though, okay? They're talking vegetables that talk about God and Bible stories and things like that. And so I grew up watching VeggieTales. After church every Sunday, go home, watch VeggieTales, and there's Bob the Tomato, he's front and center, and then there's like Larry the Cucumber, Asparagus Jr., and then a few other ones I don't know. Junior is the guy with the backwards hat. He was my favorite, simply because I would not eat asparagus. That was my excuse. I was like, Mom, I won't eat asparagus because Junior is my friend, and I refused to do that because it'd be rude, and so I didn't eat asparagus. I love the VeggieTales, and still to this day, they're good if you're just really bored, just to kind of kill time and reminisce on the past. But one of the things that stuck with me is the song that they sang. One of the songs that they sang is God is Bigger Than the Boogeyman. And when you're 6, 7 years old, that's a good song to know, because you realize that anything you could be afraid of, God is bigger than that. God is bigger than the dark that you're afraid of. God is bigger than the bully at school. God is bigger than anything you can dream up in your mind. And when I was a kid, that's how it was. That's how I viewed God as. God is bigger. God is bigger than everything. There is nothing more powerful than God. And that's how it is when you're a kid. You realize that, man, God is just so big and strong and He can do anything. But then maybe, I don't know, for me what happened was my world got bigger, my problems got bigger, my responsibilities got bigger. And somehow through that, I made God smaller. Not that He became smaller, but in my mind, we tend to put Him on a back shelf or in a box and say, God's still important to me, but sometimes you lose that feeling of God is bigger than anything. I remember one time we had some door knockers come to our house. And not going to mention any names, but after they left away on their matching bicycles and in their shirts, I remember I had asked my mom, because I overheard this conversation. I said, Mom, what were they talking about? Because I heard them say God, and I heard them say Jesus Christ. And so I said, Mom, what were they talking about? I was so interested. And my mom wasn't sure how to handle this. And do you even remember this? Probably not. That was a long time ago. But she wasn't sure how to explain differences. She wasn't sure how to get into a conversation about the deity of Christ with a 5 or 6 year old little boy. And so in her mind, what she did was she said, well, yeah, they were, but they think God is this big. And I was like, no way, God's not that big, because I know that God is bigger than the boogeyman, and the boogeyman is not that big. God is big. He's a big, awesome God. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning, because sometimes we lose that. Sometimes we forget that God is bigger than anything that we know. He is an awesome God. Now, the awesome is a word that we say lots. We say this word lots. Here's what it actually means. Awesome is causing or inducing awe, inspiring an overwhelming feeling of reverence, admiration, or fear. Now, I'm going to be completely honest and be the first to admit that I call lots of things awesome. Like cinnamon buns. I used to say, they're awesome. That cinnamon bun was awesome. Or this is awesome, or that's awesome. And I work with a lot of the youth at our church, and the youth say this word lots. Like every second word that comes out of their mouth is, awesome! Everything's awesome. Your hair is awesome. This is awesome. That's awesome. Everything is so awesome. But not everything is actually awesome. Not everything causes or induces awe. I've had some really good cinnamon buns in my life, but I've never had a cinnamon bun that literally, just overwhelmed me and brought me to a place of reverence and fear. Cinnamon buns have not done that to me. They're good, but they're not awesome. Here's how we actually use awesome sometimes. Very impressive. Most of the time, when we say awesome, what we're saying is, it's very impressive. Very impressive cinnamon bun. Very impressive hair. I like your hair. Very impressive. And I made this challenge to the church in Edmonton, to myself in front of them. And I said, I am going to try my hardest to reserve this word awesome only for God. And I've done an okay job, I think. I've said it a few times and I've been caught, because they will catch you. If you make a challenge, if you challenge yourself in front of a group of people and you say, I'm not going to say the word awesome anymore, and you say it, they will find you. And they go, hey, remember? You said you weren't going to do that. And so that's why accountability is good. Accountability is a good thing. And so I've slipped up a few times. But I'm really still in this process of reserving this word awesome only for God. Because I believe that only He is worthy of it. From the true definition, only He is worthy of it. So let's try not to get them confused. Awesome is causing an overwhelming feeling of reverence, admiration, or fear. It induces awe. Let's not say awesome and say God is very impressive, because He is awesome, the true definition of awesome. One of the passages in the Bible I go to see the awesomeness of God is Job chapter 38 and 39. And here's how that passage starts. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Your version might say out of the whirlwind, out of the storm. Out of the storm, God speaks to Job. Now, if you read the context, you'll find that there's actually no storm happening. There's no tornado. There's no rainstorm. It's not windy. But for some reason, the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. I don't know what the weather was like. But I do know that at this point in time, Job's life was a cold, stormy, and windy place. If you don't know the story of Job, at one point he had it all. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, 500 donkeys, countless servants, and above all of that physical stuff that he had a family, and he had the reputation of being the greatest man in the East. That's what people called him, the greatest man in the East. Imagine if that's how people knew you. That's how people knew you. You are the greatest man in the East. You have lots, but most importantly, what he had is his relationship with God. He was the most righteous person on the face of the earth at that time. You could say that he had it all. He remembers the day when he had all 10 of his children sitting around his table, and he could tell them about their day, they could tell him about his day, but none of that mattered anymore, because Satan wanted to interfere in Job's life. And the Lord allowed it to happen, because the Lord knows Job's heart. Only the Lord knows our hearts. So the Lord knew Job's heart. And so Job was tested. And so here's what happens to Job. Job is having a day just like any other day. And one time, one of his servants comes up to him and he says, Your fields were busy. They're being plowed by the donkeys. And the Sabaeans came and they took all of your donkeys. They killed all your servants. And I alone escaped to tell you this. I mean, talk about a bad day. I know we have bad days, but imagine that. By the way, your field, all your donkeys, someone came and killed them, and all those servants too. They're all gone. So there goes your job. There goes your life. really, now you have to try to figure out what you're going to do because you just lost the job. But this person's not even done telling this story before someone else comes up and says, someone else came and they took all of your camels. And you go like, great, how could this day get any worse? But then the worst news of all came. Someone came and said, all of your children were in one place, all at the same house, having a potluck. They were eating together. And a storm came, a whirlwind came, knocked the house down. And all your children are dead. In one day, this happened. He lost everything. Can you imagine what your worst day is like? And then comparing that to Job's and seeing all that he lost in one day. And Job begins to question God. He wishes that he'd never been born. And he says, why, God? Why me? Why now? Why this storm that killed my family? Why this storm that is my life? He's at one of the lowest points in his life, but it's at this moment that the Lord speaks to Job out of the storm. And oftentimes it's in our lowest moments, in the moments where our lives are stormy and we feel that they're miserable, that God speaks. And so in those moments of desperation and of quietness and in those stormy times in your life, pay attention because the Lord speaks to Job from the storm. And here's what he says. Imagine God saying this to you. Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? God says, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Imagine God saying that to you. Brace yourself like a man. I'm going to question you, and you have to answer me. And the questions he asks are very poetic, because words really can't even explain the awesomeness of our God. But God asks Job some questions to try to show Job how in control God is. That even though this is happening in your life, God wants to show Job, I am still in control. I've still got this. I'm God alone. I can take care of this. Job was going to learn that God is an awesome God. And here's the first question. Where were you, Job? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who has marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Imagine God saying that. Who marked off the earth's dimensions? Surely you know. I mean, weren't you there all those years ago? And we go, well, God, why would you ask that? Of course, you know where I was. I wasn't even around yet. I was way before my time. Where was God, though? On his throne. He is the eternal one. He has no beginning and no end. He is the only one who has laid the earth's foundations and created the heavens and the earth. He is the eternal one where we come and we go. But God remains forever. Here's the next question. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb, when I said, this far you may come and no farther? Who shut up the sea behind closed doors? Who talks to water? I mean, I can't even get a little dog to listen to me. I tell a dog to sit and it gets up and goes. You know what's worse though? Cats. They won't listen to you at all. Dogs you have a chance with, but cats, there's nothing at all. But half of the time I can't get a dog to listen to me. I've never tried talking to water, but I'm positive it would not listen to me if I said anything to it. But I could tell you of a story of 12 fishermen turned disciples who were in a boat and it got stormy and their sailor talked to the water and the water listened because the captain of that ship was God. God alone speaks to the water and the water listens to him, listens to nobody else. How about this one? Have you ever given orders to the morning? Have you? Has anyone here told the sun to get up? Because I haven't, and even if I tried, it wouldn't matter anyways. One thing I learned while I was here in Cameron, was doing my sunset training, was Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of Egypt. He honestly thought it was his job to wake the sun up every day. And so what he did is he'd get up early in the morning before the sun actually came up, because he knew that if he got up early enough, he could maybe convince people. So he would get up early enough. He would sit on his throne and he would say, sun, come up. And of course, like clockwork, the sun comes up, because that's how God's designed it. And so Pharaoh thought it was his job. He thought, I have this much power. I can tell the sun to get up and it listens to me. Well, imagine his shock when the plague of darkness came on Egypt. And all of Israel and Egypt was totally dark. And Pharaoh got up one morning and said, sun, get up. Sun. Oh, this is embarrassing. Sun, get up. And it didn't happen because God was teaching Pharaoh a lesson that you actually have no control. that I alone bring the sun up in the morning. You don't do that. That was the message that Pharaoh needed to hear. And that's the same message that Job needed to hear. That Job, you don't wake the sun up. That's not your job. You're not that important. It's not your job to wake the sun up. I am God alone. I give orders to the morning. How about this one? What is the way to the abode of light? And where does darkness reside? Surely you know, for you are already born. You've lived so many years. Imagine God saying this to you. Where is the way to the abode of light? And where does darkness live? Something I haven't even thought about. Where does light live? Well, light's not even a physical thing. It's just kind of, I can't even explain what light is and what darkness is. But God asks, where does it live? Can you take it home? Do you know where to take it? And something that just blows my mind. It's like, no, God, I hadn't even thought about that. It just shows us that our minds can't fully comprehend and can't fully know everything around us. There's some things that are reserved for God alone. How about this one? Have you ever entered the storehouse of snow or the storehouses of hail? I mean, where does God keep snow besides Canada? Where does God keep snow? He asks Job, have you ever entered the storehouse of snow? Have you seen the warehouse where I keep all of the snow? And have you seen the place where I put all the hail? I separate them because they're different things. I know they look the same in the winter, and then in the summer it hails and you think it's snow. But God says, no, different things. And I have warehouses for them. Have you seen those? We go, well, no. I only see snow when you let it fall on the earth. And I only see hail when you let it come on the earth. I don't see where it's kept. That's not for me to know. And he's using some poetic language here. But he's making a point that, listen, Job, I'm just so awesome. There's things that you don't even know about. There's things that you can't even see, that you just see the effects of. You don't even know the full extent of what's going on here. God is so in control. All right? He's so in control. One flake of snow does not hit the ground without God knowing. Anywhere on the face of the earth. One hailstone does not hit the ground without God knowing. God is never caught off guard and going, it's hailing? What? I didn't call for that. God knows exactly what's going on. How about this? Does the rain have a father? And who fathers the drops of dew? Is the rain out of control? No, the rain has a father. In fact, the rain has the same father that you and I have. Now, I'm going to take a little sidestep here and just preach for a second. But there's a lot of talk right now about our climate and changing, and I won't put those two words together in that right order, but you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of talk about whether our climate is changing, and listen, you can have a different opinion than me about this. It's one of those things that totally opinion. You can disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. But regardless of what is happening to our climate, to our world, one thing we know for sure is that God is in control. All right? God is not looking down at our planet and going, what the heck are they doing down there? I have no idea how to control this. They're out of control. I have no idea what to do. That's not the God I serve. Okay? The God I serve is not panicked. He doesn't respond to us because he doesn't know what we're going to do. He is in control. And so whatever is happening to our climate, to our world, know that for whatever purpose God is allowing it to happen, and God is still in control. There is nothing that God doesn't control. The rain doesn't hit the ground without him knowing. Snow doesn't fall without him knowing. It doesn't hail without him knowing. God knows all things. Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, here we are? This terrifies me. Just this thought of like lightning coming to me. Can I go here? Can I go there? I don't control that. That's not my job. But every second, 100 lightning bolts strike the earth. There was 100 right there. Right there. Right there. Right there. And we had nothing to do with it. We had nothing to do with it. But each one did not leave without God's permission. God knows, and God is totally aware and in control of everything that happens. And he knows where each one landed. Job, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Now, personally, I haven't seen these things. But we have some hunters here, and so I'm just curious, has anyone actually seen like a deer or a doe or something give birth in the woods? Bernie has. Okay, so it's something that happens lots because obviously there's lots of deer and need to be born somewhere. But unlike us, the deer don't announce their birth on Facebook. It's not like you can get likes for a baby deer on Facebook. They don't post it. They don't go to the emergency room. They don't let everyone know that they're even pregnant. What they do is they go deep in the bush, and in that quietness and in that place where there's nothing else surrounding them, they give birth. That is where the wild animals give birth, is deep in the bush where no one sees. And God says, do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Have you watched the doe bear her fawn? And I haven't, because it happens in secret places, in places that I don't visit regularly. And unless you go in these places regularly, then you might not see it. But you might see it once in a while, but pretty rare. But here's the point God is making. God says, I'm everywhere. There is no place that doe can go where I'm not going to watch it. There is no place that the mountain goat's going to go that I'm not going to be there with it. I've been to the mountaintops. I've been to the valley. I am everywhere. There is no place on this earth you can go where God is not there. Nowhere. Because He is everywhere. Because He is awesome. Scientists tell us that 95% of the ocean is still unexplored. 95%. You think of what we think we know. We think we know a lot, but we only know 5% of what's in the ocean. And that 5% blows my mind. There are things I learn about, and I go, God is so creative that God would make this animal, and it lives like this, and it eats like this, and it sleeps like that. My mind gets blown when I see some of the creatures God's made. And I only know 5% of what's in the ocean. I shouldn't even say 5%, because I probably know 0.5%, because I'm not that educated in marine biology. I know so little. There's 95% of the ocean that no human has seen. Things that we can't even imagine, I'm sure, that live somewhere deep in the waters. But God is there. God's been there. God created them because He is awesome. He alone is awesome. And so, if you ever think that you feel small, it's probably an okay feeling to have from time to time, because God is awesome. And this is how Job responds to God. I can't even imagine what I would say after being questioned like this. Job says, I know you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you will answer me. Listen to what Job says here. He says, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. That's some response that Job has. Job realized how small he was, because he had seen a glimpse of how big God is. He says, God, I had heard of you, but now I've seen you. And it's not like Job had just heard things, okay? He was considered to be the most righteous man in the entire world. The most righteous man in the world. And he says, God, I had only heard of you up until today. Up until today, I'd only heard of you. The most righteous man in the world. He says, I've only heard of you. But today, it's like I've seen you. Today I have seen you, because his world suddenly got a lot bigger when he saw how big God was. So how does this affect our lives? Knowing that God is an awesome God is what I call a top-button truth. It's a top-button truth. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever put on a dress shirt or a shirt with buttons, you start at the top, right? That's the first button you do. And this probably happened to a few of us, where you keep going all the way down, and by the time you're at the bottom of the shirt, you realize that it's not even, that you've messed up. You have to do this whole thing over again. And so what you do is you unbutton all the way back to the top. You make sure that top button is right. If that top button is good, everything else will work. And as long as you get the top button right, you'll have a nice shirt at the bottom. That's why I say knowing God is an awesome God is the top button truth. Because if we have that, if we know that, everything else along the way will fit into place. And our understanding of things will increase. We will start to be more aware of things. If we understand that God is awesome, if we understand that He alone is worthy of everything we have, and that He is bigger than the boogeyman, and that He is bigger than anything our minds can imagine, if we can grasp that and have that as our top button, everything else will kind of fit into place. God is the top button. If He sends lightning bolts on their way, do you really not think He can send help your way? God knows the 95% of the ocean that no one has seen before. Do you not think that He knows you? Do you think He's forgotten about you, that He doesn't know where you are or the situation you're in? God can send help your way, help for your worry, your marriage, your family, and your work. The marriage that you feel is falling apart. God is bigger than that. Your children haven't turned out the way that you had hoped and prayed. God is bigger than that, and He is still working. The call from your boss you didn't expect. God is bigger than that. He will give you strength. The test results came back positive. God is bigger. Oil drops to the lowest price in recent history. God is bigger. Terrorism is talked about every day, and more people are becoming afraid. But God is bigger. Your best friend shares something about you that you told them in private. God is bigger than that. Your desk is full of papers that are really only a picture of how chaotic you feel your life is. God is bigger than that. We stress out about politics, the environment, terrorism, the economy, and other very real problems that we have. And sometimes our life feels like a whirlwind. But God is bigger than any problem we face. And so let that change your life. Let that truth change your life. Let it be a top button truth where every problem you have, every struggle you face, goes through the filter of understanding that God is bigger. Because if you know that, you can get through anything. If you know that God is bigger than any problem I face, you can get through anything. Let that change the way you live, and let it also change the way that you worship. We realize what we've done here this morning. Worship God. We're here in this small little church building, and sometimes it's easy to think that, oh, it's just us. It's just us here. We just had the Lord's Supper, where Jesus joined us for a meal. We are right now before the throne of God in heaven. He listens to us, and He knows us. He knows exactly where we are. So when we worship, when we come together for worship, let's keep that in mind as we're sitting, and maybe sometimes as we feel alone or we feel like it's just us. Realize that we are before the throne of God and that He is bigger than anything you face. And so that should change the way we worship. I've heard an interesting comparison recently between people who sit in church pews and people who sit on an airplane. Both kind of, get on, they get in, they settle down, and you just, you get on the airplane and you go, all right, I hope nothing happens. I hope this is just a quiet flight. I hope nothing happens. I hope there's no turbulence. And I hope we can have a nice, safe landing, and then, just carry on my way. But do you come to church like that? I just want to go, I just want to sit down, and I don't want anything to happen. All right? I don't want any babies to cry. I don't want any turbulence. I don't want anything to happen. By the way, I'm so glad that if I hear a baby cry in church, I smile for a second, because I'm like, there's young people at our church. There's young life at this church, and so I smile at that. But sometimes we just want, we want no turbulence. We want nothing. We just want to come, we just want to worship, and we want to go home and act like nothing ever happened. But God is bigger, and I believe that when we come together, He wants to change us, to shape us, maybe to give us some turbulence sometimes, and shake us up and say, listen, do you realize what you're doing right now? You are before me in heaven. And so be open to a little bit of God's turbulence. If things happen, realize that God might be calling you to something bigger. And here's a big thing I want you to take home. We should leave here different than how we came. We should leave here different than how we came. After experiencing God in worship, that should change us. That should change us. We shouldn't just kind of shuffle out of here with a sad look on our faces saying, that was nice. We were just before God. That was incredible. I don't care what the singing was like. We are right before God. I don't care what my sermon is like. We are just before God in heaven. That was amazing. Can you believe we just did that together? Wasn't that great? We should be experiencing God in our worship, and I pray that we can do that. And by the way, that's not just Sunday morning. That's every day of the week when you are worshiping God. Be open to some turbulence. Be open to just some uncomfortableness, because oftentimes that is needed for growth. So be aware of that. And the one thing I want you to understand this morning, if you get nothing else out of my lesson, realize that God is bigger than your sin. It's bigger than everything. But one thing I need you to know for sure that can change your life and that can change eternity is if you know that God is bigger than your sin. And some of you might be going, well, I don't know, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. That's true, I don't, and that's perfectly fine, because I know God, and I know God's bigger. It doesn't matter what you've done. God is bigger than anything you could have done. God is bigger than any sin you've ever committed. He sent His Son to die for us, so that we could live through Him, so that we could have our sins forgiven. The same God that we talked about this morning, the same awesome God who created the heavens and the earth, who sends lightning bolts on their way, the same God who commands the rain to fall and the hail to fall, that same God lived among us. And that same God was spit on by people He had made. And He was slapped and He was mocked, called names by the people He had made. And He's God. The same God we talked about was mocked and spit on and had a crown of thorns placed upon His head and was killed on the cross of Calvary. Don't think that's nothing. That's huge. That's huge. That's bigger than any sin you've ever committed. Sometimes there's this battle between guilt and grace where Satan wants us to feel guilty all the time and think that God's forgiveness is too small or that we're not going to ever be forgiven. Don't live in that. Realize that God is bigger than your sin. There's nothing that you've done that God cannot forgive you of. But we have to turn to Him. We have to repent. We have to give our lives to Him. We have to carry our crosses. Because when we do that, there we find forgiveness. And so if this morning you've been battling with guilt and saying, I don't think God could forgive me of that, it's pretty bad, don't let that win. Don't let that win this morning. Know that God can forgive you. He's already done His part. All you have to do is give yourself to Him. If you need to, you can do that this morning. You can repent. You can confess. You can be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. And then, I tell you, if you do that, you're definitely leaving different than you came here this morning. All right? So, I encourage you to do that. And if you need help with anything this morning, come and talk to me. You can do that now while we stand and sing, Our God is an Awesome God.
Our God is an awesome God, He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God, He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. All right, you may be seated.